that you do that. Thank you guys for once again being here this morning. We are going to continue in our series about the parables of Jesus. So if you have your Bible, go ahead and open on up to Matthew chapter 13. And last week, we looked at the parable of the sower, about the different types of soil. And I relayed to you a story about how when I was about 5 or 6 that I saw some movie and I was determined to go ahead and dig a hole from my house to China. The problem with that is I didn't have the right tools to do it. And the other problem was the soil wasn't good. It was red clay. Well, here's the second part of that story. Not many years after that, we ended up moving to another part of town, and the soil was a lot better. I didn't dig a hole to China, okay? It didn't happen. But we did have a garden. We did have tulips that lined the driveway because the soil was right. But we encountered a different type of problem. At least my mom did. Number one was me, because she had these tulips that lined the driveway, looked so beautiful. And one day I went out with a plastic golf club and chopped all of them down. Wanted to work on my golf swing. And Mom came home and I said, "Mom, look what I did. I hit all the golf balls. Your tulips." Needless to say, there was discipline involved. The second problem that we had, which every person who's ever planted anything has, are weeds. As much as I looked forward to having that garden to where we'd go out and we could get some stuff for it, I hated, and I don't mean the biblical term love less, I mean hated going out there and pulling weeds. Because weeds just never give up. It almost seemed like any time we went out and we pulled weeds, and a couple of weeks later, they'd be right back where they were, and we have to go back and pull weeds. Either those are some crazy weeds, or we were just really bad gardeners, and I'm going with that one. Because what weeds have a tendency to do is they will choke the life out of what you are trying to plant. And they can do it, and it doesn't take much for anybody that's ever been a gardener, anybody that's ever worked on a farm. They know that all you have to do is neglect what you're growing for a small period of time, and before you know it, weeds. Yay. Well, here's the thing. The same thing for you and I can happen spiritually. And Jesus, in continuing his parables, knowing his audience, knowing that his audience primarily was people who cultivated crops and things like that to live, tells the parable of the sower, but then he tells another parable in the same stream of thought. And he's going to compare two types of things. He's going to compare wheat, which was something that was definitely needed in that time frame, and he's going to compare weeds, but he's going to compare a specific type of weed that would grow in that area. And he's going to make a spiritual application, and it still is going to center around what each and every one of us either sows in our heart or allows the culture and the world or Jesus to sow in our heart. And this is basically what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 13, where we're going to look at today. There are only two options when it comes to your spiritual health right now. You are either wheat or weeds. You are either wheat or weeds. And so in Matthew chapter 13, and this is so important, given what Jesus says. In verse 24, it says there, he put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field." So once again, the parables of Jesus usually start out by comparing the kingdom to something that people can wrap their minds around. And it's important because Jesus just doesn't say, this is what life is like. Jesus is saying, hey, if you want to be a part of my kingdom, if you want to have a relationship with me, if you want to interact and engage with all that God has in store for you, pay attention. Because this is what it's like. This is why it's serious business. And it says it's like this man who sowed good seed in his field, but while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and they went away. And what's so interesting, and this, I shared this last night at House to House. This blew my mind. The type of weed that Jesus is talking about here is the darnel weed. And the crazy thing about this thing that grows is that it looks just like wheat. And what a brilliant plan by the enemies of this farmer, of this sower. I mean, how better to get at the farmer, to get at the sower, by sowing something that looks exactly like the crop that he wants to harvest. I mean, it's brilliant, because here's the thing. If he sows it and you can't really tell a difference, then the farmer who neglects his crop will simply think that everything's okay, that everything's all right, until the time comes for the harvest. And what will happen at that harvest time? Well, he's going to think that he's got a lot of wheat out there growing. But the only thing that he will reap, weeds. And here's the thing. The same thing can happen to you and I spiritually. See, our heart and our life and our minds are like that field. And what Jesus is going to say here in a little bit is that there are multiple players that want to occupy the field. They want to occupy your heart. They want to occupy your mind. They want to dominate your life. And notice, the only way in which the enemy was even allowed into the field was because people were asleep. Because somebody wasn't paying attention to what was going on. And so Jesus continues and it says, so when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And see, the master is cunning enough, because the master knows what took place. He knows that he sowed good seed. He knows that the only thing that he put in there was something that was profitable for the field. And so the master says, an enemy has done this. So the servant said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, no, lest the gathering of the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barns. And so, as a 21st century person, just in general, you kind of look at this and you say, what in the world is Jesus talking about? And once again, Jesus is saying, hey, it's not good to go out there, recognize it, pull it all together, and then, hey, get rid of the weeds, because what do? You damage the good stuff. And so Jesus is making a spiritual application, and he goes on and he explains this parable to the disciples. And as he explains this to the disciples this morning, hopefully he's going to explain that to us as well. And he's going to be able, and he's going to tell us exactly who are the characters that are in this parable and why they are so important to not only the disciples here and the people that he's talking to, but also to us. And so in verse 36, that's where we pick up the explanation for the parable. And then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples came to him saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. And he answered, the one who sows good seed is the Son of Man. Jesus says, hey, the person that sows good seed is me. And I hope this morning that you really take that to heart, that you're not here and as you question, sometimes there are these times in life where we feel absent from God, or we feel like God is distant, and we have this question of, hey, where are you? What's the purpose for my life? Where do I go from here? Just understand that while we try to figure all of that out, we should ground ourselves in understanding that God and his son Jesus want nothing but what is good for you and your life. Because we live in a world, and we'll talk about the ruler of that world here soon. We live in a world in which this book and the teachings of this book are maligned as archaic or hokey or out of date, and that this book is just a book of nothing but rules and commandments designed to make sure that you live a really boring life. That's what we hear. But I'm here to tell you this morning that this is, from start to finish, the greatest love letter that you will ever read, about the greatest relationship that you could ever have. And anybody who understands a healthy, viable relationship understands that the person or the people that are involved in that relationship should focus on wanting nothing but what is good for the other person or people that are involved. And that's Jesus. He's the sower of the good seed. He's the one that wants you in a relationship with him, because what he offers is the most amazing life that you can ever possibly live. And sometimes we get in the funk and we say, well, there are a lot of rules to this relationship. There are a lot of things I got to cut out for this relationship. There are all things that I want to do and that I want to focus on, that I want to have, that Jesus won't allow me to have, do, or want. Now, can you name me another relationship that's like that? Yes. Every other relationship that you're in that is successful, that is viable, that is practical, that will last is like that. Name me a relationship in which, in order for that relationship to stand the test of time, there aren't certain conditions that are involved. There isn't one. And isn't that the paradox we find ourselves in? We wouldn't accept some of the things that we want from Jesus. See, sometimes people want to be in an open relationship with Jesus. They want to have Jesus and then everything else in life. But they wouldn't take that same principle into maybe a dating relationship or a marriage. But it's supposed to be okay with Jesus. See, a relationship with Jesus demands and requires, not because of Jesus being stubborn, but out of the necessity of love. There are things that need to be cut out. There are things that are cut out because Jesus knows if those things are allowed to be sown in your heart, it will lead to an absence in that relationship. Not that Jesus will go anywhere, but you will go somewhere. And so Jesus is the sower of the good seed. And the field is the world. And the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. Now, this is so interesting, because what Jesus is saying is that the kingdom, or that the field, is the world. And we look at the world and we say, and you just watch the news and we say, man, the world is completely and totally messed up. Amen? The world's messed up. And what the world needs to see and what the world needs is some good seed. And sometimes what we read into this verse isn't what Jesus says. Jesus says, hey, the good seed is what? The preacher, the elders, the deacons, the church building. No, the good seed are the sons of the kingdom. What Jesus is saying is, The world is messed up, and the world needs something to be sown in it so that it can be corrected, so that it can yield a good crop in the hearts of all mankind. And who are the people that do that? Who are the seed that God sows? You and me. That's you and me. But here's the thing. Sometimes we act like we got a choice of whether or not we want to be sown. The seed doesn't tell the farmer where it wants to be thrown. You ever think about that? I mean, how crazy would that be? Farmer picks up a handful of seed and the seed says, I really don't want to go over there. I'd rather be back in the bag. You got no choice. I mean, if seed started talking, probably need to see a doctor, but hey. Seed doesn't get to decide where it's thrown. It is cast and it grows. And that's the same thing for you and me. When we're going to engage this world, when we're going to go out and we're going to try and reap and sow into a world that is completely and totally damaged, fractured, and hopeless. I hope you understand that this morning. The world is hopeless. And it will remain hopeless if the seed that God has thrown into it, you and me, remain silent, inactive, idle, and comfortable. I hope this morning you're not comfortable where you are in your spiritual growth. I hope you're so uncomfortable that it gets you out of your box. That it gets you out of the seed bag, so to speak. And that you are engaging people that look nothing like you. And here's the thing about that field. That field is broad, that field is different, and that field is made up of different types of soil. And see, this is where we sometimes get off path. And you can shoot me an email about it, or you can talk to me later. But this building is not the only place where seed can be sown. It's not. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that what takes place here on Sunday and Wednesday isn't important, because it is. But if we think the only place in which seed, us as people, are going to engage the world is this building right here, not going to reap much of a crop. Because I don't know if you've seen the polls, I don't know if you've seen kind of the cultural shift. That field coming into a place like this is becoming less and less and less. So what does that mean? That means we have to go there more, and more. Just go up to a random person. Go up to somebody who you know is, quote, spiritual but not religious, or has no affiliation with organized religion. Just say, hey, ask them, hey, you want to come to church Sunday morning? More likely than not, now than at any point in time in our history as a country, the answer will be no. So this morning, question before we move on. Where are you putting yourself in that field? Are we confining the field in which we will allow God to cast us as seeds for the growth of the gospel? See, there's no plan B. Regardless of what some people want to say, the church is it. I don't mean the building, I mean you this morning. The church is the only plan that God has ever had so that the gospel would grow. And where the gospel does not grow, the church must look inwardly and ask the question, what are we doing in light of what we see going on in the world? It's far too easy to blame the field for a reason why the seed hadn't been cast there. It's far too easy for us to look at culture and say, well, the reason that the culture and the country is going down the tube, so to speak, is because, well, the country's messed up. Certainly that's the case, but guess what? Field's going to be a field no matter what's cast there or not. the culture is going to be the culture regardless of what we do or not. Ungodly people are going to live ungodly. And you can't expect ungodly people to live godly when the church is inactive. That doesn't make any sense. And so that's what I want to press in on us today, this morning, for our lives, not just for a sermon to fill 30 minutes. And so he continues to go on, and he says, and I got so crazy I missed a page. And so then he says, the field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. See, there are two seeds and there are two sons. And here's the crazy thing. There are also two things that are being sown in the field. There's wheat and the weeds. The good seed, the wheat, are the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. And here's what Jesus is going to say ultimately, that they both can look similar. And the wheat won't know it or won't pick up on it until it's too late. You ever think about that? I mean, seriously, one of the questions that we should ask ourselves is, and one of the questions that we can ask ourselves is this: what moral action can an atheist do, or what moral action can I do that an atheist can't? The only answer is love God. So what does that mean? That both people can work charity. Both people can serve the poor. Both people can love someone as their self. Both people can be charitable. Both people can be an honest worker. Both people can tell the truth. But the distinguishing difference between the two is that one has a relationship with God and the other doesn't. And so this morning we have to ask ourselves, who do we look like? Because here's maybe a hard pill to swallow. I can be here every single Sunday, and me and the atheist can be just as righteous. See, if I'm not careful and I don't manage the field of my heart, I can think that I'm wheat when in actuality, I'm a weed. And Jesus says the sons of the evil one are bad. And why is Jesus giving this parallel? Why is Jesus even having this conversation? Because the religious culture of the time demanded that Jesus make a distinction between the people who would follow after God and the people who thought they were following after God but clung to some things that weren't of God, namely the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were so concerned about how they looked to other people, who were so concerned to make sure that they looked the part and they acted the part, but their hearts were far from God. Isn't it interesting that they called Jesus the son of the devil, or that he cast out demons by Beelzebub, yet they were the ones who looked more like the weed than the wheat. And so Jesus is making a commentary on what it means to be spiritually idle, not just a commentary on what it means to live unrighteously. And sometimes we favor the latter rather than the former. What I mean by that is this, is sometimes we would rather, oh hey, what's up? You want to help out? I didn't put that in the notes, I promise. But sometimes we would rather favor the former rather than the latter. Sometimes we would rather just say and rather, massage our own failure, massage our own sin by saying, well, at least I'm not like this. Or at least I'm not like that person. Isn't that what the Pharisee said to the publican? Lord, I thank you so much that I'm not like this man. And I do all of these things, and I have no concern spiritually for actually growing in a relationship with you. I'm just okay with being the spiritual robot. I'm just okay with just walking in, sitting down, and leaving when the lights go out. I'm not concerned about fellowship. I'm not concerned about holiness. I'm not concerned about studying your word outside of the hours that are required. Not concerned about evangelism. But lo and behold, Lord, at least I'm not a drunkard. All the while being a weed. And my point is this: being a Christian is not just a matter of not doing certain things. Being a Christian is not a matter of just being reactive. If you want to be wheat, it's about being proactive for the sake of the gospel. There's a big difference, and I said this last night at House to House. There's a big difference between works-based faith and faith-based works. And if you're here this morning and you're just here to check off the box and you're just here to kind of go through the motions and that's just kind of how you've been, I've got news for you. And I mean this in love. I'm not trying to be hard just to be hard. I mean this. I mean this because I care and I love and I want all of us to have abundant life. If you're just going through the motions of Christianity, weeds. And what Jesus says is that the person who just goes through the motions and the person who just abstains from doing a lot of stuff but has no heart towards the gospel, has no heart towards him, son of the evil one. Isn't it interesting that the Bible calls Satan a lion that grows around and growls, seeking to devour people? And if you've ever seen a lion hunt, the lion doesn't announce to the zebra, I'm coming to kill you. Know what the lion does? It looks like the very field, the very Serengeti grass that the zebra feeds in. So that at just the right time, at just the right place, when the zebra's not paying all that much attention, before it knows it, the lion is on the throat and choking the life out of it. And I don't want anybody who I've ever come across, who I've ever met in this building or outside of that, to be devoured by the lion, to be choked out by the weeds of the world because we weren't paying attention. Too many have already fallen. And too many people are so content with their Christianity, in the mode of Christianity, they look more like the Pharisee and the Sadducee rather than they look like the Son, Jesus Christ, who wasn't reactive to the culture, but placed himself in the culture so that something might be sown in the hearts of men everywhere, so that people would know God, people would fellowship with God, so that that relationship would dominate their life. And it would be a difference maker, not just in the lives of that person, but in everybody that encountered them. And the problem that we have in American Christianity is we're just so darn comfortable. Because nobody's trying to kill us. And we're more concerned about what happens on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue than they are what happens in 1919 North New Hope Road in Gastonia. Weeds, pig slop. And if we don't refocus as individuals, and if we don't refocus as the church universal, the day will come when we look back in our old age as the life that we live or the breath that we take, and we'll look back and we'll say, what in the world went wrong? And we'll have nobody to blame but ourselves. And Jesus continues on, and he says that the enemy is the devil. I hope you get that this morning. That there is an actual enemy. You know, there's not one point in time when I was in Iraq that I rode around Iraq thinking that I was on a vacation. There's not one point in time when I was riding the streets and going through towns and going through small villages where it wasn't apparent that at some point in time somebody wanted to kill me. I never walked through a village and say, everybody in this village loves me. Fallujah, most dangerous city in Iraq, never once rolled through there and said, you know what? I think if I just go to every single house in this village, in this town, everybody will be okay with me being here. You know what would happen if I did that? I wouldn't be standing here preaching to you this morning. There is an enemy. And if we're not aware of that enemy, then that enemy has already started to consume us. I hope you know this morning you are at war with things in society that want to kill you, that want to consume you, that will place you in a place separate from God forever. All because of weeds. But notice what Jesus says after this. He notes in verse 40 that the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom causes of sin and lawbreakers, and throw them into a fiery furnace. In a place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You know, I'm always so uncomfortable reading verses like that. And I don't understand. It's just kind of a side note. I've never understood the preachers who are happy in preaching about that. Because here's the thing. There are two types of people. There are two types of weeds. And there are two ultimate destinations for everybody for all time. And Jesus says, hey, when the harvest comes, that's the time at the end of the age that the Father has set. That there will be a time in which he will send his angels and he will reap the harvest. He will reap the wheat. He will reap the good seed, the sons of the kingdom, the sons and daughters of the kingdom. And there also is going to be a time in that point, at the same time, where the wheat grows with the weeds, in which the weeds will be gathered up. The lawbreakers, the sinners, and they will be separated from God forever in eternal pain. And isn't it ironic that in the name of living for life, to eat, to drink, and be merry, to live how I want to live, so many people living for the joy of life and doing whatever they want to do, they end up hurting forever. All over weeds. All because they never saw the lion coming. All because they never thought they could be a weed. But Jesus gives hope at the end of this section. And he says this, then, after that takes place, the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. See, if we live by the rules and by the whims and by the sway of the king of this world, then we will reap what has been guaranteed from this world. Pain, suffering, torment, and brokenness. I'm here to tell you this morning that that's all weeds can offer. I've never met one gardener who was happy that he had weeds in the garden. I know I wasn't. I've never met one person who's ever had a crop grow and it be destroyed by weeds and say, you know what, it was a good season. But I know a bunch of people who've sown gardens, gotten rid of the weeds, and reaped a really good crop. And they've used that to satisfy themselves and to satisfy others. And what Jesus promised here is that if you are wheat, there will be a day in which no matter what takes place, no matter how many weeds we might be surrounded by, no matter what takes place in the culture, no matter what happens to me physically, I'll see the Father in light. And it's really simple this morning. If we take off the ties and the jackets and the dresses, and we just look in the mirror, who are you? When you get up and you walk out of this building this morning, who are you really? Is it possible that maybe this morning you're really not doing as well as you told everybody you were doing? Is it possible this morning that you've allowed some weeds to grow in the place of wheat and the recesses and the recess of your heart and of your soul? Is it possible this morning that despite telling everybody that you're okay, that despite giving kind of the standard smile and looking the part, that you need redemption and that you want to see and be with the Father again? And there's no fancy practical application, because the only person that knows is you. And so this morning, what are we going to choose to be? Individually, collectively, to this community, to the people who we encounter every single day. Are we going to choose to be wheat and allow the Father to sow us wherever He wants? Or are we going to be weeds? Are we simply going to use our time on this earth to look like the culture, walk like the culture, act like the culture, but pretend to be wheat and choke the life out of people who need the gospel? And so this morning, I'm not just going to say, if you need help, come forward while we stand and sing. It's too easy. What I am going to say is this. If at any point between the time that we stand and sing and the time that you walk out of this door, you need to pull a brother or sister or a group of brothers and sisters aside to pray about what's going on in your life, Just do it. Just do it. And this might be to the chagrin of some tradition, but we don't need you to come down here to know that something's going on in your life. We just need you to reach out to somebody so that we can begin the process of turning weeds into weed. So if that's your desire this morning, don't come down here. Find somebody. We stand as we sing.